You know, the NSA leak, I feel I've been reasonably fair in the videos I made on the subject. I made two videos, one about PRISM and one about Snowden, and criticized both sides in both videos, at least to some extent. I criticized those in favor of Snowden when they started jumping on civil liberties bandwagon and made bad or false arguments against the NSA, or for throwing support to nations like North Korea and being unable to see ulterior motives. I've also defended Snowden for much of the criticism he received, as well as harshly criticized Obama's speech about PRISM. But my main reason for criticizing both sides of the argument was because they used incorrect information or bad arguments. And in the case of Obama's speech, I felt he inaccurately portrayed what these programs do, and most of my criticisms were centered on the subject of dispelling misinformation than actually talking about the programs. As such, neither video really explained what I thought about surveillance programs. Before the Snowden leak, many people reacted by shouting that these programs couldn't exist. Despite my position's vindication, I feel too embittered about human stupidity to be able to gloat very much. It seems to me that instead of coming to terms with the reality, many people just switch to shouting about how evil the American government is and how the programs are bad, all the while still failing to understand their own ignorance on the subject and doing foolish things like praising nations that offered Snowden asylum without any consideration to ulterior motives for helping him, and shouting about how surveillance programs are evil and that the government's reading their secret cake recipes. If people can no longer believe the programs don't exist, they'll believe the programs provide no utility and exist only for evil's own sake, so they can justify going into an emotional tantrum instead of examining the situation rationally. It disturbs me the lengths people will go to avoid the acquisition of useful information if that information makes them the least bit uncomfortable. That said, it does not at all surprise me. It is, after all, easier to have an emotional reaction, call oneself a good person, and receive an ego-stroking than it is to put in the effort to understand a complex situation. That requires time, patience, and critical examination, and it's far more convenient for most people to adopt a stance that doesn't require elitist things like thinking or logic. Ain't nobody got time for that. For a long time, I had to consider if I should make videos concerning more serious subjects like secret government programs, torture, espionage, terrorism, etc. I've wanted to make videos talking about these issues and events in Egypt and the like, but based on the poor reaction that I originally got, I thought maybe I should ease people into it more slowly. However, it was after that the Snowden leak happened, and I'm at the point where I'm concerned that the gradual pace I was shooting for may not be a valid investment of my time. I think that the people who used to shout at me that PRISM didn't exist, who now jump on the bandwagons either for or against the NSA, simply don't want to know more, and it's not going to matter if I attempt to present that information gently, so I'm going to try being upfront for a while and see how it goes. So let's talk about secret intelligence programs for a minute. After the initial Snowden leak, there was another concerning the USA spying on other nations' governments, and this leak obtained a fair amount of criticism and people shouting about civil liberties and blah blah blah. Since then, I've seen a large amount of people adopting a near-isolationist position that is vehemently against all forms of surveillance, both at home and abroad, and promotes total lack of involvement in the affairs of other nations. This stance, however, is based on knee-jerk emotional reactions to the revelation that these programs exist, and is comparable to the position of ban all guns that is fielded whenever a school shooting makes the news. Such a position is, in the long term, highly implausible, but that's what happens when people allow their emotions to decide their political views. While one could question the nuances of which surveillance programs are okay and which ones aren't, the stance that no intelligence programs are okay is a knee-jerk reaction devoid of reason. We live in a world where traveling from the United States to Europe takes several hours instead of several weeks, and with the continued development of technologies that grow ever closer to rendering the planet uninhabitable, we'd be incredibly irresponsible if we simply ignored such a problem. I'll use an analogy to illustrate. Imagine you're living in a dorm room and your roommate is a meth addict. You could adopt the stance that whatever he does on his side of the room is his business and not yours, and you therefore have no responsibility to intervene if he lights the carpet on fire. The problem with this stance is that you also live in the dorm room, and the fire may spread to your side of the room, and you may or may not be able to contain it when, alternatively, had you been more proactive, you could have avoided this situation. We cohabitate this planet, and if someone else can decide if the planet is going to be habitable for humans or not, the situation at the very least merits keeping tabs on and continuously observing. If someone's stance is that the United States should adopt a completely isolationist stance and that all surveillance programs should be shut down, a stance I found too much support behind, it crosses the line into total irresponsibility and consequently a government's failure to protect its own citizenry. So long as we are stuck sharing this planet's ecosystem with those capable or perhaps desiring to destroy it, this is a threat we should be aware of and actively managing, and foreign intelligence programs that involve spying on other nations that we suspect are going to behave in that manner are by far the most effective means of doing so. One thing we could do as an economic power would be to offer trade benefits to other nations that take certain measures against pollution to induce certain behaviors, but this would not fit into an isolationist stance because it's the utilization of a monetary inducement to adjust the behavior of another country's government, and the simple act of identifying whether something is or is not a threat, or should not be worried about, will always require intelligence gathering and often require spying. People don't understand that by adopting the stance that all spying is evil, they effectively blindfold themselves. Spying, covert operations, bribery, blackmail, and assassinations are much more effective means of preventing disaster than simply sitting on one's hands and waiting for disaster to strike. As the saying goes, an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Now, as for spying on one's own citizens, I would need to make another video entirely to cover that subject, but there is one point I'd like to make. I explained this in more detail in the PRISM video I made, but PRISM is basically a big filing cabinet. Everyone's data is collected into a profile, and if a reason to look at such a profile comes up, the data can then be opened and examined. Now, one of the big civil liberties concerns, and I pointed this out in my previous video, was that this could be used to blackmail people. But why can it be used to blackmail people? In many cases, a good form of blackmail is threatening to leak information to the public if a particular figure doesn't cooperate. Now, this in itself is a problem, because public reputation is largely dependent on large numbers of people being highly susceptible to the media. The simple fact is that pretty much everyone has a few skeletons in their closet, and one particular person's closet coming to light, in a more rational society, would warrant little attention, and in most cases no damage to the person's reputation. And consequently, blackmail would be a less effective tactic in several situations. But that's not the way things actually go down. In modern America, otherwise ordinary behavior is suddenly newsworthy if it involves a celebrity or politician, and scandals that make a big deal of someone's otherwise normal closet skeletons manages to actually damage that person's reputation. The problem here is that people behave in an extremely hypocritical manner. If one big business CEO were being blackmailed with the threat of exposing his closet, the public fails to realize that his closet probably looks very similar to most people in positions similar to his, or perhaps even similar to many of the people rushing to judge and condemn the individual. This then results in blackmail being largely effective because the public behaves in a manner to make it effective. Now, with using a car, one could say, well, I don't like polluting, but I need my car to go work efficiently, and without it, I'd be disadvantaged, therefore I have to contribute to the oil businesses. But that argument doesn't apply in this case, because the main consequence someone suffers by not mindlessly following the media scandals is that they become less of an imbecile. As such, it's a bit of a joke for people to cry tyranny and oppression when their own behavior actively sustains the effectiveness of said tyranny and oppression for no benefit other than their own stupidity. It shouldn't actually matter if the government knows what donut shop you go to, because no one should care. Now, I'm not saying that you should switch your position for or against PRISM or for or against surveillance programs. What I'm pointing out is that the vast majority of people in favor of these programs don't understand them and are in favor for the wrong reasons. And the vast majority of people against these programs don't understand them and are against them for the wrong reasons. And this state of widespread lack of understanding and general ignorance is a much bigger threat to your rights, freedoms, and civil liberties than any surveillance program could ever be. And that's the point I wanted to make to you. Anyway, that's part 2 in cognitive dissonance and foreign intelligence. Stay tuned for part 3. Like the video, share it, subscribe, blah blah blah, you know the drill. I'll see you next time. Later, YouTube.